Our next speaker is Kapil Bhosale. He works at Decision Tree Labs. Before that, he worked at Fab. A lot of people might be knowing Fab. A lot of Fab people here. All right. So Kapil also loves trekking apart from coding. If you are a fan of going to mountains and hills, you should definitely talk with him after his talk. But just a warning, if you go with him on a trek, chances are that he will finish the trek quickly than you. So you will start at the same time, but then when you are at the halfway stage, he has already reached the top. When you have reached the top, he might be already gone to his home. So just be sure that he doesn't progress too quickly. Are we getting ready? He is going to talk about collecting errors. So that talk is, I think it will be best that his talk is after the Ratnadeep's talk, because Ratnadeep talked about debugging our memory issues, and now we are talking about collecting and showing our errors. Also, one more thing is Kapil is our first time speaker, so he is not at all nervous, obviously. But if he is nervous, then it is your job to make him less nervous. So give him good round of applause before he starts the talk.
So, good morning, friends. My name is Kapil. I'm a Ruby developer since last approximate 7 years. Apart from Ruby, I also love to code in Java. Image processing is also one of my core area of interest. Currently, I work with a company named Decision Tree Labs. Decision Tree Labs is a small group of people working in Ruby, React.js, React Native, and similar technologies. I also happen to be a co-founder of this group, Decision Tree Labs. Please check out our site for more interesting projects we did, the client we served, and other details. Today, I'm here to tell you a story. This is not an investigation story. I'm not an investigator. So this is something different story. So this story is about why we wanted to create an error reporting tool. So the first part is why we wanted to create or have such tool. And the second part is how we created the tool. So this story is about creating an error reporting tool using active support instrumentation and rack-mounted UI engines. So this is the agenda for today's talk. I would like to speak about the motivational part first, why we wanted to have such tool, and the second part is the how part, how this goal is achieved. So that the second part is divided into, we'll discuss Rails pub/sub architecture, we'll discuss more about active support instrumentation, we'll also take a look at Rails hook, we'll take a look how we have a mounted UI using rack, details of the gem that we created as a part of this experiment, learnings from this experience, and the future goal for the gem Spectre. So the first part is why we wanted to have certain tool. So we were working for a European client and GDPR was newly introduced. There were huge confusions around the concept. So what are the data collectors? What data they can collect out of your application? Are they eligible to store that data on their servers? And there were huge confusions. While digging into the tools, I found that the applications share most of the data with such error collection tools. So we share environment variables, we share secret, we share user data. There are a couple of samples I would like to share with you guys. So this is one of the code snippet from the gem rollbar. I included the source code for authenticity as well. As you can see at line number 2, the gem is trying to figure out the current user that is passed to this, passed when this exception is occurred. So at line number 2, this gem has an instance of your current user, the logged in user. And at latter code, the gem is trying to figure out the username emails. Not only username emails are available to the gem at that moment, also the tokens, the phone numbers, and each and every information that is available with the user object. This is one example with the gem rollbar. Similarly, similarly, you can find out with reference to the gem air brake. As you can see at line number 29, the gem is trying to figure out the instance of a current user, and this way, this error reporting tool will collect the data. So this is kind of a logged in current user is available to to this particular gem. So I'm not saying that the data collect is inappropriate. So what our point is, the data collected is not present on your server. These are not present on your ecosystem server. This data is collected and it's shared with the gem on their cloud and is available on their servers. So some compliances might not allow this type of behavior. So with the huge confusions at GDPR, we scrapped the rollbar or XYZ error reporting tool because there were confusion around the concept whether the compliance allow such tool to store my user information or my legit information on their servers or not. So we went to the other part of this thing. These tools are pricey, so they have some cost associated with them. There are limitations on the count of occurrences they track. There are limitations on for the duration for which the data is stored. Some of them will store for 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 months max, not more than that. So as you can see, there are different prices plan and there are different limitations associated with each and every plan. So that was the how part, why we wanted to have certain tools. They are collecting our data, that data is not present on our servers, and there are some limitations with certain tools. So what is the proposed solution from our side? So this is an overview of the proposed solution. Why can't we have a similar tool, but the tool is open source and free? No data is passed outside your servers or outside your own cluster. So, and the tool is mounted like Sidekick. Sidekick has a beautiful UI. It is mounted UI inside your application. Why not to have a error reporting tool with certain similarity as Sidekick? There will be no limitations on occurrences. There will be no limitation on storage time. As the data will be residing on your own servers, you have all the flexibility to store the errors for duration, whatever you want. So the solution we propose is a gem named Spectre, spectacles on errors. So that was the proposed solution. So this is the technical details of that solution. Imagine we want to have certain tool in Rails, so what we'll do? So the first part is to gather. We need to gather information first. Whatever exception those are getting generated inside your complete Rails application, you need to gather them first. The second part is to store those exceptions alongside your own database, the same database you are using for your Rails application. The third part is to display those tracked exceptions. So we chose to use rack because we don't want to bloat this particular gem using some other options. I will discuss later. And the last part is to get notified when certain exception occurs. Notifications via Slack by creating Jira issues or via mail. So this is a kind of a technical overview of the solution that we are proposing. So let's take a look into the Rails part, how Rails help you to gather those exceptions. So how many of you are aware of the term Rails instrumentation? You might have heard the term. So that is one of the good concepts introduced in Rails that was introduced in Rails 3. So this thing, Rails instrumentation, is available since Rails version 3. So what exactly is Rails instrumentation? It's a kind of pub-sub kind of architecture. Pub-sub is a asynchronous service-to-service communication, mostly used in serverless and microservices kind of architecture. It is used where you have a decoupled kind of application. Your application has a nature of decoupling. So these things can be used. So I would like to tell you with respect to the Rails how PubSub is introduced via Rails active support instrumentation. So there are multiple controllers, mailers, jobs, and all the components of the Rails application will publish certain events based on certain actions happening, let's say, inside controllers. These events are available to a particular subscriber via event bus. This is imaginary kind of thing. So these published events are available to the subscriber, those who are listening to those particular published event. So Rails gives certain kind of hooks via inside the controller, mailer, and all the components to which other developers can hook in and get informed about the data that is being passed on certain kind of events when occur inside this controller. This is analogous to a radio kind of application. All the radio signals are already broadcasted and are available to us even now. we need to tune to a particular channel to listen the data or the payload that is being transmitted on that radio channel. This is kind of that thing. Your Rails application is already broadcasting certain event. You just need to tune to particular data points to listen to those particular events. So what are the default hooks or the default notification that Rails sends? So there are default hook for action controller, there are hooks for views and SQL as well. What are the hooks with respect to action controller? Whenever there is an action process starts, a controller action starts executing, there is a certain hook. If you subscribe to that hook, you will get notified whenever a controller action starts executing. There are hooks when action is complete. There are hooks when a controller action sends data. There are hooks when it sends file. There are hooks for redirection. There are hooks for unpermitted parameters even. So these are with respect to controllers. Also, whenever there is a partial render or a view rendered, there are hooks in case of view. The most important hooks are with respect to active record. Whenever there is SQL query executed, we have hooks for that even. There are hooks for mailer, there are hooks for job, cache, and also if you are executing some deprecated method inside your Rails, you can choose to listen to those hooks, and the deprecated methods with a particular payload is available to you. So that was an overview, what are the exact hooks available and all. So let me show you closer look at a single hook, how you can, when this hook will get published, and how you can subscribe to that hook. So the when part, this is a SQL hook. So whenever there is an database related activity happens inside your application, this hook will get called. Whenever your application is checking for pending migration, this hook will get called. Whenever there is an SQL query via active record, this particular hook will get called. Okay, enough. So, but when and how you can subscribe to that particular hook? You need to have a piece of code that, as shown in the slide, into the initializers of your config directory. So let's say I declared a SQL hook listener inside my initialized directory with a active support notification subscribe object followed by the hook that I want to listen to. So this is a SQL active record hook. This hook will pass with a certain payload, and I'm creating an event object out of this, and I'm inspecting that event object, and this is the snippet that I received when I listened to that SQL hook. So it will have a raw SQL that is being executed, associated schema name, the transaction ID, the time parameters. This all will be available to that particular SQL hook. So that is the default hook available in Rails. Also, you can have your own hooks. Let's say you can create this kind of hook inside your application, no matter it's a controller, model, helpers, or anything, services even. So just create an instrumentation object, active support notification instrument object, followed by the custom hook you want to notify, followed by the hash as a payload. So this type of hook you can release, you can have this kind of custom hooks inside your application. So there were default hook, you can have your custom hook even. Listening to the custom hook remains the same. Just have a subscribe object and a particular payload is available to you. So by this moment of time, we are aware that there are default hooks in Rails. We can have our custom hooks as well. Inside this gem specter, we are listening to two particular hooks. Those are process action that is associated with the controller and deprecation Rails. This piece of code is there in the initializer part of the gem. So we are listening to these particular two hooks. Whenever there is a event inside a controller, we'll get notified. Whenever there is a deprecation method called inside your complete Rails application, this gem will get notified. So that was one of the use case. Having this Rails instrumentation is a good part, and we can use that thing to catch exception. What are the other use cases of this Rails instrumentation? You can use instrumentation to have a better analytics of your application. Let's say you are using active mailers, multiple mails are being sent from your application, you are listening to multiple mails. You can have a subscriber which is listening to a particular mailer, and you can build a small dashboard wherein you have an analytics of what mails you are sending per day, what mails you are sending per action and all. So you can similarly listen to cache. What are the percentage of your cache miss, cache hit, deletes, etc. So these kind of small analytics you can build by subscribing to the particular hooks with respect to the mailers, jobs, and cache. Also, the other use case that we found is in the case of event-driven application. When the application are kind of decoupled in nature, for example, the shipment applications. Whenever a shipment arrives, you need to inform a carrier. So these 2-3 parts are a kind of decoupled one. In this kind of applications, you can also use Rails instrumentation. That is a good piece to have with. But there is also one warning. Why I figured it out while going through multiple blocks. Don't put your core logic inside these subscribers. So what thing will happen whenever a core piece of thing is happening, very tightly coupled part is subscribed and some other part of application is processing that part. So it will be difficult to debug. So this is just a warning. If the nature of application is kind of decoupled one, you can use it. One may come with a very logical argument till at this moment of time. If there are callbacks, why to use instrumentation? So this is in line with the philosophy of Rails. There are multiple ways to do a single thing. For example, let's consider an e-commerce example. There is an order model. Whenever an order is created, you need to create some links, modify inventory, and also shipment handling part is there. That is one approach. I can have all those as a callback inside my model, or I can have a order model publishing some event that is order created, and the subscriber, that is a kind of decoupled part listening to that event, will get notified and will handle the shipment kind of things. So this is kind of another architecture. You can do the same things, but with some other way. So till this moment of time, we have an overview of how the gathering part will work. Rails instrumentation is a perfect job for that. Instrumentation will get notified. The gem is listening to certain action controller events, will get notified. The next part is to store that exception, parse and store a particular exception. Whenever something, as we are listening to action controller hooks, whenever something happens inside action controller, we'll get notified. That might be exception or might not be. If you pass the parameters or the arguments, you will see an exception payload present whenever there is an exception, but obvious. So we are checking the particular exception argument. If it is present in a particular notification, we are sure exception is present. After parsing that particular exception, we have all the details, the exception, parameters, path, backtrace, line number, controller actions, and everything. So this piece of code is now giving us parsed information that is ready to be stored inside your own application's database. So we have a similar database YAML file which specifies what database or what tables, what database you choose to store these exceptions into. Database storing is the next challenge, that is the next requirement. But the storing these exceptions synchronously is a bad idea. It will directly affect on the performance of the host application if we store this exception directly. The options are using background jobs. Using sidekick-like thing to do that job is not a good idea. We will bloat the gem. So we were looking into the details and we found that light multi-threaded architecture is well suited for such kind of application. So we use a gem Sucker Punch. Sucker Punch is a great gem, allows you to do asynchronous processing with a very light footprint. So we decided to use Sucker Punch, and with the help of raw queries, we are saving that exception into the database. Via raw queries, you will get the answer in the next slides. So we are done with the storage part even. So what is the next part? Displaying. The errors are stored at this moment. The requirement is to have a display similar as a sidekick. So the explode options to have are Rails engine and a rack. So you can have a mounted UI with the help of Rails engine. So let's take a closer look what are the exactly details of a Rails engine. Rails engine are kind of miniature Rails application inside the host application. Let's say you are using Rails engine inside a gem. Those are a complete full-fledged Rails application inside your gem. So it will be Rails inside the Rails. The syntax is fairly simple to create the Rails engine. So what I found is this is not a good idea to use. It's like using a huge nuclear power plant to power a single house. And Chernobyl is not a good idea to use. So what is the other option? So the other option is to use rack. So this small piece of code will generate a single web page, a small web page with a content hello from rack. Whenever run, it will run on a port 8080 with the help of a thin server. I can say this part of code showing hello world is equivalent to a Rails application showing a hello world on the front page with a single route. I can say these two are equivalent. If the small piece of code with 2-3 lines of code, I can do a certain mounted UI, why to use full-fledged Rails application with all active support, active record, helpers, everything and everything. So that's why we choose to use a mountable UI with the help of rack without bloating the gem. So details of rack. What is exactly a rack? A rack is a HTTP interface for Ruby. It's like writing HTTP in a Ruby language. It gives a interoperability between the web servers and web frameworks. This is inspired by Python web servers gateway interfaces. This is a fantastic piece of thing we have with Rails. I can say Rails is a full-fledged, a powerful rack app. Rails is built on the top of rack. You can have small rack application without Rails doing certain kind of functionality. Rack is great, but it's a very basic tool. It's like using a very Stone Age kind of tool to do certain tasks. You need to write manually all the things with the help of your Ruby codes. And imagine, we are so much habituated to use Rails nowadays that we are not aware what exactly Rails is and how you need to write certain piece of code using core Ruby. So imagine yourself writing certain piece of code without the active support core extension, without blank, present, try, and JSON support. Try it, that will be a challenging thing. So here is a glimpse of certain thing that we chose to have a mountable UI with the help of rack. Here is a piece of code which shows how routing will be difficult without Rails. So in Rails, you have routes.rb, you defined get, some path, and a matching controller. But in rack, you need to have your own matchers, if-else code blocks to match a particular route. So even supporting REST type of things for a certain single route is even more challenging. As you can see at line number 7 to 12, a single route is matched with the help of regular expressions, and the latter matching of the methods is done using the other piece of if-else code. So this kind of routing is needed if you are using rack. That is one of the challenge we faced. The other challenge is, that is the purpose we were using raw SQL queries. There is no active record. Because no Rails engine, no piece of functionality that is provided by Rails, we have plain rack. So you need to write manual queries. Active record is a great tool. That abstracted the raw queries so much from us that we are not aware that how the underlying processing is done. So in this gem, we need to check for the multiple databases. The client app might be using Postgres, MySQL, or some other database. So there is some conditional part. We check if it is a Postgres connection, doing certain thing in certain way using raw SQL queries. If it is MySQL, some other way. So at this moment of time, we achieved the gathering of exception using instrumentation. We stored using raw SQL queries because we are using rack. We are not with a Rails engine. We also managed to have rack mounted display with the help of routing and rack kind of ERBs. You need to manually use ERB because it's not Rails. And the last part is to get notified when certain exception occur. The getting notified is fairly simple. There are APIs provided by Slack and other channels. You can create a simple net HTTP post object with a webhook URL with a payload of the payload JSON as an exception, and you will straight away get notified inside your Slack channel. This piece of code is fairly simple. If you tracked an exception, you will get notified inside the Slack channel as well. So that was the part how we did it, the 4-step, how one can use the gem. Usage of gem is fairly simple. You need to have the gem mentioned in the gem file. The gem is currently served via GitHub as of now. There are certain generators inside a gem. The first generator is for database YAML file. This will give you a default generator as equivalent to your database YAML file. You need to modify it so that you have a choice for in what database you need to store the errors. The next generator is for mounted part. The bundle exec Rails generate mount will generate certain piece of code inside your routes.rb that will mount the Spectre web engine, the mountable part, at a path/Spectre. So with the help of these two commands, the gem is usable inside your application. You have a generator's database config file. You choose to modify it. You will get notified in the the errors are stored in that particular database, and also you have a mounted UI. This piece of code can be put inside the other namespaces so that security can be added. So those were the details. This is one of the screenshot from the gem. So this is a dashboard showing the details of error stack and the listing of the errors. Each errors are grouped by day, and the bar is divided into two parts. The blue part is the resolved error count on the day, and the gray part is the unresolved error on that day. There might be multiple exceptions on a day. So this is a single view. You have all the required debugging information for that particular exception. Also, there is a resolve button, and the gem also specifies what environment of application this is. This gem can be used in all possible environments. You have all the required information of a particular issue. You can resolve a particular issue, and that's it. This is the minimal functionality, and also Slack notifications are there that is added to the gem till now. So with the help of all these instrumentations and rack, you have an ability to get the exception and the store exceptions. So what are the future plan for this gem? We are planning to collect more data points associated with an exception. So that are our future plans. We'll also collect similar data points as the current user like the roll bar and air brake. But we'll store all those data inside your application. You own that data. No one else will own that data. We are also planning to have user roles and assigning of that particular issue to the user who is working on a particular gem. That is also we are planning to have. We are also planning to have Jira integration or GitHub integration so that you can create Jira issues or GitHub issues right away from a particular mounted application. Also, we are planning to have more graphs integrated. We are also planning to have JavaScript, React, or some other framework support in the future. That's it. The gem is open source. The gem can be located at this path. Feel free to contribute. We are thankful in advance to you for the contribution inside the gem. Thank you.
Thanks, Kapil. Give him a round of applause.
Thank you.